married a Jewish man, below hatarat shum moreh, without getting a heter. So it's shomeret yavam lashuk. Shomeret yavam lashuk is an issur lo ta'aseh. Okay? As a machloket, Rav and Shmuel were the kiddushin tovsim. Okay? So she married someone else. Okay? V'nodahu shebemitat ba'ala haya ha'ach mishumad. We know that the ach was mishumad at the time that the first husband died. We don't know, he's not saying what the story was with this ach mishumad at the time of the first kiddushin. Right? But we know at the time of death of the husband, of the first husband, that the ach was already a mishubad then. Right? Kasher hu adayin. Va'atash niseit le'ish, bakshuni ha'ish va'isha. Now they come to him. Right? To Marmenberg, and now they want a heter. Okay? Limtso la drachim u'tzdadim leheter, acharei ki hu b'di'evet. Okay? She had kids from the guy. There was a guy in between that she lived with. Right? She has kids from the guy.
Not with this new.
Not with this guy. Not with this new fellow. Okay? There's no issue of mamzerut here. Right? But there's an issue of whether they can continue being together. Okay? Now, what follows is the type of considerations which are very important when you deal with situations like this. Namely, what's going to happen if you aser? So you could say, like this, you could take a certain approach and say, Hal iteu l'rasha v'yamot. They did something aser. I'm not going to be mati for them just because they did it. Right? You sort of take a principled stand. Right? But on the other hand, they already did it. And what's going to happen if you aser it, then they're not going to listen to you. So you have to see if you can try to find a heter. Okay? That is the approach that he takes.
Principled stand on behalf of this poor woman.
What?
I said, what about the principled stand on behalf of this poor woman? If you
but
they, I
said, but she got married without getting a heter. Okay?
There was a case like this in the Jerusalem Post a couple of months ago.
That what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A woman who for 20 years was Yivama, and they wouldn't do chalitza because they wanted money from her. And over this time, she married somebody else and was with somebody else and had 4 children with him.
Yeah.
And wanted to marry him.
Yeah.
And so finally, they did manage to get the chalitza. But then the question is, could she marry him? Because she was with him before when she was still.
Right. Is that the question? That's considered an issur sota or not?
Yeah, but I think they were. I think Har'el was involved, and I think they did work it out.
If you can find me that article, it'd be interesting. Okay, so let's see what he did. So he says like this. Afilu hachva amarnu aleihem lefros zemizeh ad kineidat shuvat rabotenu. So the people that asked the question to Mari Mutenberg said, all right, you're asking the shaila. In the meantime, separate until we get an answer. Okay? V'lo avu. And they didn't listen. Ki avama omeret shesham'a. This is when? The 13th century? Right? But listen to the type of things that went on. Shesham'a mipi gdolei rabotenu she'amru eleha. Like she asked Rabbanim, like, what would the halacha be in this case or that case? Shelechatchila ein matirim la linaseh, aval im hi ta'avor v'tinaseh en mafrishin ota. So she said, no, I want to be with this guy. I wanted to be b'di'eved. Right? She was getting ye'utz mishpati chinam. Okay? Va'alda samcha. V'hinam yoshvim anach itanu po. U'bechein mutal lein lohotzi hadavar la'amito le'oro api rabotenu. Okay? So what does he say? He has a couple of different arguments that go on here. Okay? The first is B'shem ha'gaonim she'im nishtamed b'sha'a shekidsha ein tzarich chalitza. If at the time of the kiddushin there was an ach who was a mishumad, so there's no need for chalitza. Okay, Rashi's cholik on there. V'katav b'tshuva achat lo samchin alei u'tzricha chalitza. Okay. Okay, hold on. We'll see. Hevi ra'el davar gonim deheicha deleka yavam ela mishumad. If the only yavam is a mishumad, diptura min chalitza. Right? Why? Listen to what the Gemara says. We need to listen to the application of the Gemara. The Gemara that we saw. Elame ata yivamash nafla lefnei mukashchin tepe below chalitza dadaita hadahachi lo kidsha nafsha umishani tavlamet of tandu, etc. The question is, do you say tavlamet? How much when you say isha b'chol dehu nechala? What is the definition of kol dehu? How bad? Right? Does kol dehu really mean no matter how bad the guy is, nechala? Or is there a situation which is, you could say, even worse than a kol dehu? So if the guy is a meshumad, that's worse than a kol dehu. Okay?
Nice Jewish woman would marry.
No nice Jewish woman would marry a meshumad, right? In Cain, the gabe meshumad deleka lemeimar hachi da'anan sahadi lo nechala lityabein lo. Why ki avirena al it should be data, right? Ve'adaita dahachi lo kitchen nafsha meikara heicha de mishumad haya v'havule ki'ilu hitnita imo al menat shelo tityabein lo ad kan lashona mara. Okay, so that's the ki'ilu hitnita. We understand that you don't have to state it because it's implicit, and that makes it a taut. So even without stating it, is a tanai. Right? So it's a mekach tos.
Can you make it tonight like that? I'll tonight that the Torah doesn't apply.
No. It's not up tonight the Torah doesn't apply. It's not that I want to be mikudeshet to you, but I don't want the yibum. That would be matnal mashikatu b'Torah. Right? That you can't do. That she should be mikudeshet, but I don't want the dinim of yibum. No, that if this situation arises, there's no kiddushin. Right? So that's not she's not changing the Tanai is not to change the halacha, right?
She believes so much in the halacha, she doesn't want the halacha to be solved, because she would never marry.
She would never marry, right? Aval gav the yesh lach lo dafka hatam shaya mishumad meikara. Oh, so okay, but the case here is not as good because in this case we don't know if the ach was a mishumad at the time of the kiddushin. He was only a mishumad at the time of death. Okay, so that's a different thing. So there, Hatam right? Because the mum has to be b'sha'at hakidushin, and here the mum, so to speak, namely the acha mishumad, was not. If he wasn't a mishumad b'sha'at kidushin, so there was no mum. It only came up afterwards. Okay. Abonidon didan lo havi mishumad b'sha'at kidushei echav lo shach l'meimer hachi. So what does he say? He says something else. He says, basically, that the Meshumad is not considered Jewish, so there was no Zika which was formed at the time of death. Since he was a Meshumad at the time of death, that's when the Zika is created. So he goes off in a different way, which is not in the direction of mekach taut. But he's willing to he's being consistent. What he's willing to recognize is that, and he's mitmoded with Isha b'chol dehu nechala. He's willing to say that if the person was a meshumad b'shat hakidushin, so then he's willing to say it's mekach taut. Right? Again, theoretically, that wasn't the case here. So here he has to find another heter. Okay? Just like in the previous case, when the chassan turned out the chassan was blind, he was willing to say that that's a mekach taut, but he was sort of relieved that he was able to be kol for a get. Okay? So we don't have yet an example where somebody was actually matir based on saying there was a mekach taut. Okay? Not yet. Anyway.
This is radical because he's willing to say, she's willing to say just anyone. He's willing to say, let me define
what anyone is. Right? Kol dehu. There's something worse than a kol dehu. Okay.
If you look at it as the equivalent of ki'ilu hitnata.
Yeah.
What difference does it make if he was a meshumad at the time or not? I mean, the
right.
we saw were, if I come back in a year or things that certainly were not the case.
Yeah, so the ki'ilu hitnata must be just a rhetorical flourish, I think, because he's building on taut, right? Okay, let's see. There's a tshuva by Yitzchak Elchanan. Also, the person didn't let on that that he was a saris, right? He was married twice before, and the woman still married him, and he ran away. Okay. So the end, after he goes through, he also, it's very hard for him to be matir, and he's stuck with the tashbetz at the end. Chavot Yair was also matir, but the Chavot Yair, also at the end he says, La halacha v'lo l'maisa. Theoretically he was willing to be matir, but he wasn't willing to actually execute the psak. Okay? So he says, in the Chavot Yair, as קשה לסמוך על זה למעשה, כמו שכתוב שם חובת יאיר בעצמו, שאין זה רק להלכה ולא למעשה. Okay? The oat bet, towards the end of that tshuva. Yeah? זה רק להלכה ולא למעשה. Okay? וכן בתשובת שבות יעקב, השיג על חוות יאיר בזה. Right? That was the tshuva that we saw. וכבר הקדים בזה התשבץ, right? דהשיג על הסוברים לצדי להתר מצד שאינו יכול לבעול, ואף גיטה לא בוי, דהבי כתנאי מפורש, והשיג על זה התשבץ, עיין שם. Okay? And in his own shuvot, Rabbi Yitzchak is quoting himself, in the Be'er Yitzchak, right? Heveiti divrei atashbetz v'chizakti dvarav. Okay? But here, he says, Al Kain, right, and he assumed, Ein shum makom l'smoch hazel l'tzadei l'teira. But then, ubesafek saris benidon didan, yesh shnei sfeikot lachmir. Echad dil, okay, some argument for the Shulchan Aruch. Let's leave that. Okay. Then he says, Al kain nin alu daltei heter be'enai bazeh ke'et. V'ratziti, this is very interesting. This goes against something actually that the Rav said about being matir agunot. Okay, but let's see what he says here. V'ratziti lefrosh mizeh v'lo lachnis et atzmi klal b'chol zot u'b'inyan b'chol zeh u'b'inyan hachamur halazeh. I didn't want to get involved in this shayla. Achein machmat b'chiyata v'tza'akata haba elai nichmeru rachamai al ha'isha ha'aluva v'ra'iti letzadei lehetera kefi ma shehoreini min hashamayim. So he was willing to be mekah, because he was willing to reconsider all the arguments. Why? Because he saw the woman. So the Rav, I heard the Rav say himself. This I heard myself. He said,
which one is the one he decides he's going to?
This case, that the person that she was married, that the guy was a saris, and he got married once, and he got married twice, and she married him, and then he ran away.
You mean, but he's saying mekah taut, like it's
he said mekah taut, yeah.
Argued all these things.
He argued all these things as he changed his mind. He changed his mind, and later, and then he was matir. The Rav once said about the way we matir agunot. He said before the dayan sits, before the posek sits to decide the situation, so he can have all the empathy and he sees the tragedy of the situation. But once he sits down, then it's the sugyot and it's the tosfot and it's the Rambam, and he ignores the people. Right? That's what the Rav said. Right? It's very severe. Right? Again, it goes to this Platonic view of halacha. So this is exactly Rabbi Yitzchak Chanan. It's funny that's Rabbi Yitzchak Chanan. That's like just ironic. Okay, he says Machmat b'chiyata v'tza'akata haba elai. Okay, so b'chol we have to find a heter. Okay, so after he went through the whole sugya and he thought like the tashbetz, he was matir because of the tragedy of the situation. Okay,
it says above what his svara is for the.
Yeah. That's the tashbetz. Okay, that basically it's tavlamet of tandu, and it's not really a taut, and all the cases which talk about a taut by the case of the woman.
But the tashbetz meaning that it was a t'nai in the ketubah?
No, not the t'nai in the ketubah. That it's basically it's not considered a taut. It's not considered a taut. Woman wants to be married even under those circumstances. Tavlamet of tandu.
What's his reason for heter?
That it is that he's willing to say that it is a mekach taut.
Where does he say he's lying for what?
He's willing. The question is whether the guy is a saris or not. That's what he's willing to say, that he's taris and it is a mekach taut. It's the chavot yair. he's willing to take the Chavot Yair L'Maaseh. So it's hard to be someone Chavot Yair. The Chavot Yair said Mekach taut, but blah 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 lo L'Maaseh. But then he's willing to go with it. Rav Moshe was willing just to go all the way. Okay, the case was as follows. A very politically not correct, this case. Okay, v'hinei ra'iti v'mashi rotzeh kvod Torato lechalek bein dorot elu לדורות קדמונים, ממה שרואים שאנשים דורות אלו מקפידים עוד יותר במומים דהאיש, ממה שמקפידים אנשים במומי הנשים, והנה אף ששייך לומר סברה כזו, קשה לעשות מעשה. כי הרי גם בזמן הגמרא מציאו דנשים לא היו מתרצות אלא מי שחשבו להגון להם. There's nothing new that women care about who they marry. In the time of the Gemara, they also cared about who they married. And nonetheless, Chazal said about those women who are similar enough to our women, this is his guy, Tav l'meitav, Tandum l'meitav, Armalu, right? But he's willing,
Where does he come up with this?
he has proofs from the Gemara, different Gemara that say the woman, that women want to avoid marrying people that are lo hagnot lahem. That means they have certain self-image and self-confidence that they're not willing to marry anybody, right? Usually he quotes the Gemara, right? That would be trivial to read through that. But then he says, at the end,
I meant, like, how does he assume that that's similar to women today?
that this Peita, all right, you say
Meaning
obviously
so
you
they
can do a
had-
closer, they were makpid. So today the women are maybe more makpid. So okay, so he's leaving that up in the air. It's not as if, because there are cases in the Gemara which would belie the statement of Nashim b'chol dehu neichalahu. You see that people cared about who they married, right? From other stories in the Gemara. Okay, let's take a look at the last paragraph here. Aval inyan nidon didan. Right, the case is that the husband was homosexual and he was carrying on homosexual affairs while he was married. From before he was married, while he was married. Okay? אבל עניין נידון, כיוון שמצינו שהמום גדול הוא בעצם מקח טעות גם באישה כדבערתי בגרוד משה, מסתבר שזה שהבעל הוא שטוף במשכב זכור, שהוא התועבה היותר גדולה והמאוס ביותר, והוא דבר גנאי לכל המשפחה, וכל שכן שיהיה זה, it's very interesting how he understands the psychology, שיהיה זה גנאי ביותר לאשתו. It's a shame on the because he'd rather be with men than be with her, so it's a personal shame for her. It's accurate, right? אם בעלה בוחר יותר במשכב המאוס הזה תחת משכב אשתו, הוא ודאי קידושי טעות. וברור לנו ששום אישה לא הייתה מתרצית להינשא לאדם מנוול ומאוס ובזוי כזה. ואף תקף כשנודעת מזה הלכה ממנו. מסתבר שאם אי אפשר להשיג גט ממנו, alright, first thing is again, try to get a get. אם אי אפשר להשיג גט ממנו, יש להתירה מדין קידושי טעות. אך אם אפשר להשיג גט, צריך להשתדל בכל מה אפשר להשיג גט כשר. והאם אינו שטוף בזה, אלא שנזדמן איזה פעם מצד שתקפו יוצרו, אולי אין להחשיב זה לקידושי טעות. Right? You don't know how shatuf bizima is he, right? So if he has a yetzer, so that's not necessarily a mekach ta'ut. Okay? Aval kol ze im halcha mimenu tekef, aval im shahata etzlo ach la'achar shenodat az kashe levatel ha'kidushim. Okay? Ve'im ba ze me'inyan shtut מאחר שהוא שלא כדרך הטבעי, ודאי הוא מום, וכיוון שמצד שטות עלול לעוד שטותי, right? In other, if you want to look at it as some sort of mental illness, right? So you can say that even afterwards, well, who knows what type of illnesses the guy has? He's a shota here, he can be shota with other things, so maybe based on that. And maybe mitzad rishut v'nivul shegam ken hu ta'ut. So Joel, goes to sort of what you're saying. Forget about the fact the person was a homosexual. Right? If it turns out the person is a pathological liar, right? Other things, right? The person is a rasha in other ways. So that's also a moon, says. If you can show that it's rishut as a pathology, rather than just he's a bad
Isn't
person.
that by definition somebody who's not willing to give a get? Or
What?
I said, can't you say that as definition?
Yeah. I think, what's his name?
This goes back to what Rachel said before, that by definition, if somebody doesn't give a get, then it means that they're a Rasha Gamor.
But the question is whether that you say that it's in their DNA, that there's something pasul in their personality.
But isn't that what he's saying? That
if there's some sort of reshut, he's not talking about exactly what the reshut is.
Right, but he's saying that if he's prone to shtud in one way, then that means he's saying it is based on his personality.
Again, he's not talking about that example, right?
Right.
The devil is in the details. Whether that example is what he would agree is a taut. That's the easiest thing to say. That somebody, the case of in Silver Spring, what was her name? Tamar Epstein. You know who she is? You know, remember the story?
So it was like, the congressman who was working for
the guy was working for congressman, right? Yeah. See, he was a sociopath. I know the...
What? I don't know the case.
The case was that a woman got married, they had a child, and after a short time, the marriage, they broke up, and they got a civil divorce, and he just refused to give her a get. And it was just to harm her. It was pure vindictiveness, right? They were already divorced in the state of Maryland. They were divorced.
But that's guys who refused to give get do it out of pure vindictiveness.
Yes, it was pure. It was pure. Right. So it went on for a few years. Her aunt and uncle lived down the block here, and they're good friends of mine, right? It went on for a few years, and then all of a sudden they announced that she was muteret. And immediately the husband said, I didn't give a get. They were matir.
Oh, yeah.
There was a beit din. There was a beit din that was matir. I think that he didn't publish it. They were matir. I think they did based on mekah tos. But the guy was a sociopath. There's clearly something wrong with him. There really was. He was a sociopath.
But isn't that definitional? Again, anybody who refuses to give a get just
that's what
because
they did.
of vindictiveness.
So he must be very vindictive. So it was good enough for the beit din. I'm not sure which beit. I have a hunch which beit din was, but I'm not sure. So I don't want to say. But they were matir not based.
If your son wanted to marry this woman,
yeah,
would you have a problem with that?
No, nice family too.
were there people who objected to this decision?
There were some people that came out that were not asked but chimed in, and they said it was us. Right? But she's muteret, and the family is somewhat charedi even.
Is she remarried?
No, I don't think she's remarried. She's going on. She has a baby. She's like in her late 20s. It was a big thing it was a big thing. It's not a secret. It was a big thing on Facebook. There was a whole campaign.
I'm curious about when he says that she has to take it, not be with him anymore.
Because that goes back
would she have to literally move out, or could she refuse to have sex with him? To ask her to have, the second she finds this out, and she has kids, and she has an apartment, to just say, we're not going to believe that she doesn't want this unless she actually physically, what is the definition of that she has to immediately...
I think you just have to see the circumstances, right? What I find interesting here, if you go back to let's go back to the Rambam for a second, because there's
I think that point. I think it's worth belaboring that point. Is if you're talking about a mekah, a car.
Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't have an ending. Fine. It's not hard to say like, okay, I go back to this other immediately. But if you're talking about a relationship, my sense is that human nature is to say, okay, first thing is we're married, we can work this out, we'll see what we can do.
So that obviously in that case, so then it's the vindictiveness is mitgaleh. Little by little it unfolds, right? And then you see, but this person, we didn't know he was a sociopath. He had to be pushed to this point where he's acting in this...
No, but in this Mishkan let's say she gets out the first act, and he says, it was just a mistake, I'm going to change, and so she stays with him. Does that mean she's given up her right? Or and then he continues and his and
so then, no, because then she still doesn't know.
So it said she didn't know
she didn't know the extent, so it's something that she doesn't know, right? If you can show a qualitative difference, right? There's a problem here with the Rambam, which we were assuming until now, right? that the way we saw in, who was it that said it? The Marami Rutenberg, that the Dinei Taut and Mekah Memkar apply in Ishut as well, right? And that seems to emerge from the Gemara in principle, right? Except that the Gemara has, in the woman's case, this issue of Tavamet of Tandu. Okay? The question is whether you really, but all the hesitation that the Tashbets and that whole school feels, and even those who want to be matir, they have this fear of being matir just based on Mekach Ta'ud. They're looking for something else. Where the simplest thing, just say Yashar. It's a Mekach Ta'ud. You don't need a get. You don't need anything. It's a Mekach Ta'ud. The person is a saris. The person is a menufel. And he was like that when they got married, right? They always knew he was like that. So it should be a Mekach Ta'ud, right? So where does this hesitation come from, right? So I think it may come from a different understanding or a chiluk between kiddushin and dinei mamonot, right? Where all along in the introductory shurim we were talking about how dinei mamonot, we were looking for the differences, right? And we found differences between kiddushin and dinei mamonot. Okay, one of them is mentioned even in this connection. If we go back to the Rambam in Ilchot Mechira, okay, the Rambam in Ilchot Mechira, which I opened with, right, where he says, "Aval im nishtamesh bo," is exactly what we're talking about. Im nishtamesh bo achar shera'a hamum, yeah, harei ze machal ve'eno yachol lahachzir, right? So let's just understand this case. The case was that there was a mum at the time of the kinyan, unknown to the lokeach. When the lokeach found out, he said, "You know what? Forget it." Right? So we say, what? That he can't then return the object because he was mochel. But I still don't understand. At the time of the kinyan, he didn't know, and he wasn't mochel yet. So why should we should still say the kinyan is batel? Should we still say that? What does the mechila help afterwards? So 10 years later he found out about the mum, and he was mochel. So very good, but he's only mochel now. You see the problem? I was looking at this halacha and I didn't understand, right? And the Magid Mishnah says, where did the Rambam get this halacha from? He says the Rambam got it from Hilchot Ishut, Perak Chaf Hei, Halacha Vav. Okay? So take a look, and we'll see that it contradicts. Okay? Perak Chaf Hei, Halacha Vav. I want to read to you. The Rambam says as follows: Ba al ishto v'shaha kama yamim. Okay? V'ta'an shemum ze lo nir'eli ad ata. Okay? So a few days go by, and he says, now I discovered a mum. Okay? Afilu haya b'toch hakmatim o b'kaf haregel, where there's reason to believe that it took him a few days to discover the mum. Ein shum inlo. You don't believe him. It means you say that he saw the mum right away. Okay? Chazaka she'ein adam shoteh b'kos ela im kein bodko yafe yafe v'cheskato sheyada v'ratza. Okay? So we don't believe him. We say that he knew about the mum right away and he accepted it. Okay?
That's what Rachel said about
What?
That's like along the lines of...
Yeah, Rachel was asking about such a case.
Yeah, but pertaining to Ishut. Like,
and this is the case of Ishut, right? So here, Cheskato sheyada. When? Right? It's mashma shecheskato sheyada. The truth is, I'm not sure when this yada is.
It sounds like
When was the yada?
the first time they
The fact that they were together.
Yeah.
But he did not know Bishat Kiddushin. Right? So then that would be analogous. Right? Hold on one second. Right. Alright, so then there's no stira. I understood, so forget about it. But what emerges then, let's just talk about this for a second, just to understand this halacha, that if at the time he didn't know, at the time of the Kiddushin, or at the time of the Kinyan, but afterwards there was Mechila. It sounds like that the dot, this goes back to how we said the relationship between dot and the ma'aseh, and this is going to be important, that it sounds like the ma'aseh of the Kiddushin, or the ma'aseh of the Kinyan, and the dot, which needs to accompany the ma'aseh, are really two independent elements. Right? So, and that means, if you make that assumption, then you can say, as long as you did the ma'aseh, the dot can be supplied afterwards. So at the time he didn't know there was a moon. So you can say there was no dot. But the ma'aseh is autonomous without the knowledge. Even with the taut, there's still a ma'aseh. Now you can understand the hesitation. There was a ma'aseh kiddushin here, right? You need the dot or the lack of dot to be mevatel that. If there's mechila, so now the dot can be joined together with the ma'aseh that happened already. As long as at the end of the day you have ma'aseh and dot, because they're two separate elements, right? If you would claim that kiddushin or kinyan, that the dot and the ma'aseh are intertwined, then you couldn't have the dot afterwards. You would have to have together with the ma'aseh, you would have to have the dot. You would say without the dot, there's no ma'aseh at all. And the fact that they agreed afterwards doesn't change anything. Because at the time, there was no dot. Right? So there are those that claim that, not the Rambam, but there are other Nosikim that claim that that's the case with Kiddushin. And in the case of Kiddushin, he would have to Mekadesh again. You say, Savar B'Kibbel, but he'd have to Mekadesh again. Okay? So there may be a distinction between, this goes back to the I think the second shir that we had, that we saw that there, from where do we learn? Right? The Gemara on Daf Bet Amud Bet said, Haisha Nikneit. Why does it say Haisha Nikneit and not Aish Mekadesh? Because you would have a Havamina Sheisha Nikneit. Since Gerish is Bal Karcha, you would think that Kiddushin could also be Bal Karcha. So Chazal formulated the language of the Mishnah to say that it depends upon her also. That a man can't be Mekadesh a woman neged ritzonah. And from that you learn that a woman needs that a woman also needs dot. You need dot of the woman as well. Remember? Allah sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Okay. So how do we know? Taka, how do we know? So Rashi in Kiddushin says it's the halach of das by kinyan. You can't have a kinyan without dot. So you can't have Kiddushin without dot. That's Rashi in Kiddushin. Rashi in Yevamot says V'halcha v'hayta le'ish acher. She goes of her own free will. V'halcha v'hayta le'ish acher. Mikan, that a woman needs dot. So that's not drawing from the dinim of mekah memkar, but it's drawing from a unique Even HaEzer halacha. Right? That the requirement of dot, at least when it comes to the dot of the woman, is not dot makne of dinei mamonot, but it's a unique parsha that a woman needs dot in Kiddushin. Okay? Once you say that, then you're open to the possibility of maybe you don't need the same level of dot as you do by kinyan. Or maybe you need more dot than you do by kinyan. In other words, you're not bound by what you find in kinyan. Right? And remember the sugya in I'm just going to remind you, the sugya in Bava Batra and Daf Mem Daled about Tlayu v'Zavin, Zvine Zvini, Teu v'Kadish, right? So their Rabbanan say Afkeinu if he forced her, right? So the question is there her requirement of dot the same as dot in Mekhu Memkar? And there we saw it go in two different ways, right? We saw one way, like the Ravid says, for example, that the whole halacha of mishpatei hatnaim, Tnai b'nei Gad, b'nei Reuven, Tnai kaful, hein kodim lulav, those halachot are only in Gittin and Kiddushin, and not elsewhere. Okay? As opposed to, that was the Ravid. Okay? And what does that mean? Why should you need Mishpatei Tna'im only in Gittin and Kiddushin? Because the Ma'aseh of Gittin and Kiddushin is a Ma'aseh Yoter Chamur. Because the Da'at and the action are so serious. Getting married is more serious than buying a house, right? For most people, right? It should be. So it's such a serious undertaking. The Ma'aseh is so serious that in order to restrain its chalot, you need Mishpatei Tna'im. So that's saying that you need more da'at for Gittin and Kiddushin. Okay? On the other hand, we had, if you remember, the Avnei Miluim said that you need less da'at. Right? Since you don't learn it out from da'at makneh, the reason you need less da'at is on two sides. From the husband's side, you need less da'at because it's not kona anything financial, because it's not dinei mamonot. See, once you say it's not dinei mamonot, you're free to say whatever you want. So he says, since it's not dinei mamonot, he's not really making a financial acquisition. If he's not making a financial acquisition, you don't need the same level of da'at that you need by financial acquisitions. That's mitzad the da'at of the man. Mitzad the da'at of the woman, we saw the Ran says that the woman, since everything has to be done by the man, the woman is not makneh herself. The woman is mafkir herself, and the man comes in his zoche. Right? So you don't need the same level of da'at. She's not makneh. She's just take me. Right? That's sort of the imagery of the Ran. So that's why the woman needs less da'at, and the man needs less da'at. Okay, so how does this play itself out? It might very well be that if you require less da'at dafka, then you're in a harder place in declaring mekach taut. Because you said there's enough da'at. Right? Under dinei mamon, regular dinei mamonot, this would not be considered enough da'at. This would be considered in an analogous situation. Right? Say the car without an engine is like the man she'ein lo koach gavra, is like a woman without a womb. Right? That's a car. So in dinei mamonot, it's comparable, right? But nonetheless, since kiddushin is not dinei mamonot, the kiddushin is fundamentally created by the maaseh kiddushin, and the da'at is secondary and is of a lower level. Hey mitzad the man because he's not doing any real acquisition. Hey mitzad the woman because it's hefker. This is enough da'at. If that's the case, then it's harder to declare mekach taut. Maybe that was, I'm sort of psychoanalyzing the Achronim here, right? But maybe that was the hesitation. You see, there was a Maisa Kiddushin. It was a Maisa Kiddushin, and the din of da'at is not the din of da'at. So what's the basis of the Marami Rutenberg that he says it should be a ta'ut? Because the dinei ta'ut are the same as dinei mekach u'memkar. So I'm looking at that assumption. It ain't necessarily so. L'chumra, it ain't necessarily so. But I can also say that l'kula, it also ain't necessarily so. Because if I say that kiddushin requires a higher level of da'at, which we saw, that's why maybe you need amira by kiddushin and you don't need amira by kinyanim, because you definitely need a higher level of da'at, because you're not just buying something. There's a change of status. A woman is going from a pnuyah to an eshet ish with a chiyuv Mrs. Bezdin in Zinta. For that, you need a lot of das. If that's the case, then it should even be easier to declare something as a mekach taut. Okay, but it could be that the hesitation in terms of declaring a mekach taut comes from like we're not exactly sure the level of da'at that you require, and the fact that the Gemara says tav l'meit of tandu, l'meit of armalu. Right, so that makes us.
Sounds like they are considering for da'at.
We say we consider da'at. The question is what level of da'at, right? So if you say you don't need that much da'at, and that's what they're saying, she'd be married to anybody, so she's happy to get married. She'll run down the aisle with anybody, right? So there's a minimal da'at there, right? So then it's harder to declare a ta'ut. So I just want to see this sugya about the ability to declare mekach ta'ut in cases which we think. Of course you should be able to say mekach taut, right? And Rav Moshe's logic is perfectly straight. And of course you should be able to say, that Tavlamet of Tandu, Mimet of Armalum may still be true today, let's say, but it's not nearly as true as it was back then. Women have a status in society. They have support systems, which when they don't get married, it's not the end of the world. Women want to get married. Men want to get married. Maybe women want to get married more than men today. Maybe they do, right? But it's not as severe as in the time of Chazal. Times change. So the Chazakah should change, right? But where does all the hesitation come from? It's from this lack of clarity of the relationship between Dinei Mamonot and Isavet.
You don't think it's just because they didn't like the...
What?
You know, I mean, I think it could also just be like a sort of an emotion coming from like just this gut place.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to go a little deeper than that. I understand.
But I don't know necessarily. Like I understand what you're trying to say, but I think maybe you don't have to look at it you don't have to take it that far. You can just say that like sociologically, they had a really hard time having a woman leave a marriage without a get or a dead body. So it was just sort of a gut thing. It wasn't that we're going to try and make, like any argument that was made about that, maybe it was after the fact.
Okay, it could be.
Is the Rambam one who separates that from Rasa? According to what you're saying, that would explain these two things, right? That's why he can be more holy.
Right, separate that from us, but right. I don't remember. I have to see if to go back. But he's saying about mekah. He's saying about kinyanim. He's not going to say about yishut.
He's saying with the guy in yishut that if he kept sleeping with her, he was mokah. No, isn't that what he's saying?
Yes, suffer for kibbutz. Yeah. So the question is, that level of dat which is separate, what level is it? We still have that question. Okay.
The facts about Rish Lakish, does Rish Lakish say this in any other place that the Talmud have done? Why do we assume that if the examples that I didn't read it from Moshe show other places where women are not good, why do we say it's like a machloket? Why? Because Rish Lakish said one thing, we accept that as this chazakah that we have to go. Like there are lots of dare in the Gemara. Why? That's where I'm not getting.
But it's in the connection of taut is where it's said. The cases that Moshe brings are not a cases of taut. They're just cases where you see that
he said it once and then we kept
you have to see every place he said it was with the case of mekah taut. And he says it's not a taut, it's taut. Yeah. Well, last question. Yeah, we'll take a break.
No, it just seems to me like the parallel with the issue of mekah b'nemka and kinyan. It relates to Chazal trying to find a balance between, on the one hand, promoting responsibility, like for each person, the man and the woman, to do their due diligence before entering into this, this
relationship,
this relationship. At the same time, there's a recognition of, stuff happens, and the human condition. I mean, just, from my own very minimal experience, and I'm not a therapist, and I'm sure therapists could, give you so many examples of couples that really discover things about their spouse, even after they've been married so many years.
The question is whether those things can be considered. Okay, so if
it's so complex.
Yeah.
And the human condition.
Right. I think Rav Moshe is the one can really appreciate Rav Moshe here. He really appreciate.
Right.
Because he's talking about things which are not physical. He's talking about things which are not physical. All the diunim that we saw, the guy is a saris, she's an idolite, they're physical things. You could say they existed, they didn't exist at the time, right? But here, this is something amorphous. The guy is a Russia. He's a Russia then, so that makes it a taut, man.
Or even just people that, we all know.
Okay, right. I'm just saying, things that are...
when you discover things, a person can live with somebody for 10 or 15 years and discover things, or maybe they were, they were blind to it, or, for whatever the reason.
Right.
Deep psychological reasons, or, years of therapy and still, whatever.
Yeah. It's like what Gandalf said about the hobbits. You can know them forever and they'll still discover them.
A process question.
What?
A process question having to do with publishing tshuvot. That it seems that in normal civil legal systems, proceedings and decisions are usually open. They may be anonymous, but they're certainly recorded. So it's easy to find precedents, and it's easy to find what the range of possibilities are. I don't know whether, let me put this in terms of a question. It seems that based on totally anecdotal evidence from things we've discussed, that people are less likely to publish tshuvot that are mekil, or they attribute it to somebody crying and therefore not, there's less of a literature on mekil
when they're really
tshuvot.
daring tshuvas because they may have thought that the situation was unique. They didn't want to publish it. Like there's this kid. There are cases where Moshe says, "I don't want to write this down. When I see you, you're in South Africa now. You'll come. I'll talk to you about it."
But what does that mean for the system as a whole, as opposed to, again, civil systems where everything is open and where there's a literature that's more comprehensive?
And that's an interesting question
But I think it's also
to think about. That I don't have an answer to that. That's a good question.
it's also connected to ripping up gets, because the whole point is if they publish, if they said like this, where they much like the woman in
then
Silver
somebody
Spring. So if you put it out there that someone can try and pick it apart. So that's, I understand your problem in terms
Right.
of
So the problem is you don't have a coherent system.
There's a bias in the system towards conservatism.
Yeah.
Right, because the psukim are personal. Right? If the federal court decides something, right, you're not going to get another federal court say, "No, we disagree." Right?
No, they do
There's no
disagree,
central
but they do
authority.
it out in the public.
Right.
That's the difference. Of course they disagree, but the record is
No,
there.
but
Everybody
right, but the
can see
record is there, and the
reasoning,
psak
everybody
is
can see
binding.
what
But
the
then somebody
psak-
comes and disagrees, and then somebody else doesn't want to marry them because there's a ritualistic religious element which is absent from civil law. If civil law says it's mutter, it's mutter. There's no
But this is our legal system, and we're bound by it.
What?
But this is our legal system.
Right. No, but it becomes religious. So he says it's mutter, but then somebody else says it's usher. So then all of a sudden I'm choshesh. I mean, there's no similar. Tell me if I'm wrong. There's nothing similar in it to be choshesh, right? If it's, my accountant says I can take this as a tax deduction, right? There's another opinion. I want to be choshesh. I'm not going to take the tax deduction. Are you crazy?
No,
So
but
your
that's
accountant says you can take the tax deduction. You take the,
People
That comes up all the
certainly do
time.
no, you take the deduction. If IRS sues you, they sue you. But you had
And
reason.
then you bring it and you say, "This is my guy," and they say, "This
I
is their guy."
understand
and
because it
depending
wasn't
who's there.
decided, but there's no inyan to be choshesh. You just want to not be fined. So if you can show that you had a good something to be samich on, they don't fine
But
you.
it doesn't even
right?
get to that. It doesn't even get to that because you're not getting both sides. You're not getting the full range of decisions. So you're talking about down the line, but you're not even getting to that point.
Right,
in most cases.
I say we say it's a problem. I don't know. That's an interesting thought to think about that.
But Moshe here isn't giving a blanket letter.
No, there's no blanket. Shoot, never give blanket
Nobody
head.
gives
In
blanket
this
head.
case,
Particular
in this
Yeah,
case,
but even in that
this case.
but you can use it as a precedent. Once it's willing to say, right,
But
that
he wrote it down. But this case in Silver Spring is, nobody.
there's no
knows
general
who the-
questions.
we
There's a
don't even know
specific.
who the
If you would come to a motion and say,
no information. There's no
No.
information.
what would be in this case? A motion would-
But it also might
It's not even part of the
stand
literature. It's not even.
Right, but in psak,
But then for someone in the similar system,
That's a question. That's a general question.
But they
That's not
don't-
specific
they
to
don't
me.
think it's-
Someone writes a tshuva on it,
Okay.
and then that's it.
No, but also
so many of these things, nobody's going to say theoretically what it is. They'll say that this woman in this case, because every situation is different. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. And